Erev Tov Rabotai, we are continuing with our Mishna Yomi, Masechet Gittin. We are up to Perek Chet Mishnah Zayin. Today's Mishnah should be Le'ilu Nishmat Neria ben Svetlana, Ranbayev Eliyahu ben Burcha Israel of Chana bat Miriam, Sason ben Raya, and Yoshua ben Shifra, Menuchatam beGan Eden, Amen. And L'Avdu ben Chaim Lechaim v'Derefua Shenemav Daniel Shalom ben Rosa, Betoch Shar Cholei Israel. The Mishnah continues listing enactments that were made for the benefit of society. It starts with a dispute about the transaction of a deaf mute. According to biblical law, since a deaf mute is considered mentally incompetent, he cannot effect legal transactions. The rabbis, however, decreed that certain of his transactions are valid so that he can take care of his basic needs. If a deaf mute's transactions are not valid, people will not sell anything to him or buy anything from him. Therefore, to ensure that people will sell him his basic needs and that he has the money with which to buy them, the rabbis gave him some limited powers of buying and selling. Cheresh, Romez, V'nirmaz, a deaf mute may signal with his hands or head his intentions to make a transaction, and others may signal to him their intentions, and he may signal his acceptance and response. In either case, his signals are considered a true indication of his intent, and the transaction is legally binding. This law applies not only where the deaf mute signals with his hand or with his head or his hands, in which case his intent is relatively clear, but even where he indicates that he agrees to someone else's signal, in which case the possibility of misunderstanding is greater. The next Tana takes this law even further. Ben Betera, but Ben Betera says, Kofetz v'nikpatz, he may even mouth his intentions, and others may mouth their intentions to him. He does not need to signal with his hands or head. Although a deaf mute cannot voice his words, he can mouth them with his lips and have others try to read his lips. Similarly, he can try to read the lips of others. Although this method of communication is not as reliable as head and hand signals, Ben Betera holds up that the rabbis accepted it as sufficient to render a deaf mute's transactions valid. The Tana Kama, however, holds that it does not suffice for a deaf mute to merely mouth his intentions. Rather, he must communicate in a clearer fashion by signaling with his hands or head. B'mitaltilin, however, this leniency applies only to transactions involving movable property and not to buying and selling land. The rabbis accepted the transactions of a deaf mute only so that he could acquire his basic needs. Since this can usually be achieved with buying and selling movable property alone, Ben Betera does not extend his leniency to transactions involving land, and the Rav does tell us, Venecha ki Ben Betera, the Halacha does not follow Ben Betera. The Mishnah now discusses the transactions of young children. Hapaotot, this is the law of young children. Now, this applies to children who are only 7 years old, provided that they understand the concept of buying and selling. An intelligent child can have this level of understanding by age 7, while a less intelligent child may not have it until age 10. The level of a particular child's intelligence is tested by a judge. Now, children under the age of 6, however, are presumed to be unfamiliar with the concept of buying and selling, and therefore cannot make transactions even according to rabbinic law. If their father does not manage their finances, a court appoints an administrator to do so for them, as the Rambam writes in Echod Mechira, chapter 29, Halacha 6. So again, the Mishnah says, Hapaotot, this is the law of young children. Mikachan mikach, umimkaran mimkar. Their purchases are valid purchases, and their sales are valid sales. B'mitaltlin, with regard to transactions involving movable property, but not the transactions involving land. Like deaf mutes, minors are considered mentally competent and cannot effect legal transactions under biblical law. The rabbis, however, decreed that minors be authorized to buy and sell in order to be able to provide themselves with their basic needs, similar to their enactment regarding deaf mutes, as the Gemara explains on page 59a in Masechet Gittin. They made this enactment only regarding transactions involving movable property. For the reason that we said earlier, since the whole reason they made these transactions valid is so that they could acquire their basic needs, this can be usually achieved with buying and selling movable property alone. And in addition, this enactment applies only where no one is managing the children's affairs, and so they must provide for themselves. But if their father or administrator manages their finances for them, their own transactions are not valid, as the Gemara says in Masechet Ketubot, page 70a. And that is the end of Mishnah Zayin. Now, having listed decrees that the rabbis made for the benefit of society, Mishnah Chet turns to enactments that were made in order to prevent arguments. Velu dvarim amru mipnei darkei shalom, and these things the rabbis declared for the sake of peace. Kohen kohen rishon v'achrav Levi v'achrav Israel mipnei darkei shalom. A Kohen reads first from the Torah school in the synagogue, and after him a Levi, and after him a Israel. This law was enacted for the sake of peace. By creating a fixed order for the Torah reading, the rabbis prevented arguing over who will read first. Now, biblical law grants a Kohen the right to read from the Torah first. Under biblical law, however, he is allowed to honor another Jew, even a non-Kohen, by letting him read in his place. The rabbis prohibited a Kohen from doing so in order to prevent arguments as to whether his choice of replacement is appropriate. A Levi is called up next because this too honors the Kohen who comes from the tribe of Levi. The Mishnah teaches that the Levi too may not let Yisrael read in his place. Rather, a Levi must always read after a Kohen. And the Mishnah says that the Kohen, Levi, and Yisrael read from the Torah because in earlier times, each section of the Torah portion was read aloud by a different person. The first one by a Kohen, the second one by a Levi, and so on. Later, when many people were unable to read, it became the practice for a single person, the Ban Kohen, to read all the sections so as not to embarrass those who could not read, and the person assigned to each section would only recite the blessings, as Tosfot point out in Masechet Megillah, page 21b. A second enactment, Me'arvin bebayit yashan, the residents of a courtyard may make an eruv only in the old house, meaning if they had put their eruv bread in a certain person's house in the past, they must continue to put it there and not in another house. Now, when more than one house opens into a shared courtyard, it is forbidden by rabbinic decree to carry from the houses to the courtyard and vice versa, even if the courtyard is fully enclosed. However, the residents of the courtyard can avoid this prohibition by making an eruv chaserot, merging of the courtyards, meaning they take a loaf of bread that is jointly owned by all the residents and place it in one of the houses. All the courtyard's residents are therefore deemed to have the same place of residence, and the entire courtyard with all its houses become a single private domain, Reshut Yachid, in which carrying is permitted everywhere. This the Rambam discusses in Hilchot Eruvin, chapter 1, Halachot 1 through 7. And again, the Mishnah says, Mipnei Dalkei Shalom, this law was enacted for the sake of peace. If people see that the eruv bread is missing from its normal place, they will suspect others of carrying in the courtyard without an eruv, and this will lead to arguments. A third enactment, Bo Shu Karov La'ama Mitmale Rishon, if an irrigation canal flows alongside a series of fields, each with its own water pit to collect the water pit that is closest to the source of the canal gets to be filled first by the farmer who owns that pit, and the water pits that are farther away from the source of the canal get to be filled in successive order. This law was enacted for the sake of peace. Although all the farmers are equally entitled to the water, the rabbis made this rule to prevent fighting over who fills his pit first. In places where water from a river reached the fields of farmers by means of public canals, the farmers would divert the water to their fields and fill their private water pits to ensure themselves a water supply in case the river or canal dried up. In order to do so, each farmer would dam the canal, temporarily cutting off the water supply to the fields downstream. All the farmers have equal rights to the water. However, to prevent arguing, the rabbis decree that the farmer whose water pit is farthest upstream and closest to the source of the water should be first to fill his pit. The other farmers along the canal then fill their water pits in order. A fourth enactment, Mitzudot Chayav Ve'ofot V'dagim Yesh Behem Mishum Gazel, prey caught in traps set for beasts, birds, or fish is subject to the laws of theft. Although under biblical law, the trapped animal does not belong to the trapper until he takes hold of it, the rabbis prohibited anyone else from taking it while it is still in the trap. The enactment was needed only for traps that do not enclose their prey. A trap that does enclose its prey is considered a vessel that acquires whatever it contains on behalf of the vessel's owner. In that case, the animal would be acquired by the owner as soon as it enters the trap, even before he takes it. So anyone who removes it from the trap is guilty of theft, even according to biblical laws. The Gemara discusses on page 60b and 61a in Masechet Gittin. And again, the rabbis enacted this Mipnei Dalkei Shalom. For this law was enacted for the sake of peace, to prevent arguments between the trapper and someone who tried to take the trapped animal. However, if someone did take it, the courts will not force him to give it back because the trapper did not actually own it at that time. Now, the next Tana disagrees with the last point. Rabbi Yossi says, Gezel Gamur, it is actual theft to take the trapped animal. According to Rabbi Yossi, the rabbis decreed that an animal caught in a trap truly belongs to the trapper. Therefore, even after someone takes it, the courts can force him to give it back. The Rav does tell us, Rabbi Yossi, the Halacha does not follow the opinion of Rabbi Yossi. A fifth enactment, Mitziat Cheresh Shotev Katan Yesh Ben Mishum Gazel, a lost item. Now, the Mishnah refers to a case in which the owner has already given up hope of recovering the lost object, the Yush. Therefore, he loses ownership of the item and anyone may take it. So a lost item that was found by a deaf, mute, an insane person, or a minor who are considered mentally incompetent and cannot legally acquire anything is subject to the laws of theft. Although the item does not belong to such a finder, the rabbis prohibited anyone else to take it from them. This law was enacted for the sake of peace, to prevent arguments between the finder or his relatives and whoever tried to take the object from him. However, if someone did take the item, the courts do not force him to give it back because the finder did not actually own it at that time. And the next time it disagrees with the last point, Rabbi Yossi says, Gazel Gamur, it is actual theft. to take the lost item. According to Rabbi Yossi, the rabbis decree that the item truly belongs to the deaf mute, etc., and the courts can therefore force someone who took it from him to give it back. A sixth enactment, Ani hamnakef berosh hazayit. If a poor person is cutting down olives that were left for the poor from the top of an olive tree, now certain portions of a crop must be left for the poor to take. These portions include leket, 1 or 2 ears of grain that fall from the harvester's hands, shicha, produce that was unknowingly left behind, pe'ah, a section of the standing crop, peret and olelot, deformed clusters of grapes. In the case of olive trees, which are mentioned in our Mishnah, the laws of leket, peret, and olelot do not apply. So if a poor person is cutting down olives that were left for the poor from the top of an olive tree, mashet tachtav gazel, the olives that are on the ground beneath them are subject to laws of theft. Although the poor person who cut those olives off the tree did not yet pick them up, the rabbis prohibited anyone else from taking them. The poor person did not legally acquire the olives because he merely cut them off the tree and never took them in his hand. However, since he made the effort of cutting down the olives for himself, the rabbis decreed that they are his and no one else may take them. If he grasped the olives first, however, and then dropped them or threw them on the ground intending to collect them when he was finished harvesting, he has fully acquired them and they are subject to the laws of theft by biblical law, not merely for the sake of peace. But again, in this case, it says, whatever he didn't acquire, but he cut them off the tree and he never took them in his hand, are subject to the laws of theft. This law was enacted for the sake of peace, to prevent arguments between the poor person and others who want to take the olives. However, if someone did take the olives, the courts do not force him to give them back because it is not actual theft. And again, the next Tana disagrees with the last point. Rabbi Yossi says, Gazen Gamur, it is actual theft to take the olives. According to Rabbi Yossi, the rabbis decree that the olives truly belong to the poor person, and the courts can therefore force someone who took them from him to give them back. A seventh enactment, En memachin biyad aniyeh goyim beleket shicha pe'ah. We may not prevent poor non-Jews from taking leket shicha pe'ah, produce that must be left in the fields for the poor to take. Although these gifts are intended for the Jewish poor, the rabbis decreed that we must also let non-Jews take them ipnei darkei shalom, and this law was enacted for the sake of peace, to promote peace between Jews and non-Jews. We should strive for peace between Jews and non-Jews because it is written in Tehillim, in Psalms chapter 145 verse 9, Hashem is good to all, His mercies are on all His works, and it is written in Proverbs chapter 3 verse 17, the ways of the Torah are ways of pleasantness, and all its paths are peace. This is what the Rambam writes in Echot Melachim, chapter 10, Halacha 12. We also support non-Jews who are poor, visit non-Jews who are sick, and bury non-Jews who are in need of burial because of the ways of peace, as the Gemara Gittin writes on page 61a with the commentary of the Ran. That is the Nabotai of today's Mishna Yomi. Baruch Adonai Leolam. Amen v'amen.